So we're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to begin with we have a number of Interfaith Power and Light board members that are here tonight, and I'll introduce you to some of those folks later. But for right now, I'd just like to introduce Reverend Jeremiah Griffin, who is the pastor at St. Chad's Episcopal, and he's going to share with us a prayer to open our evening.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to be here with you. Let us still ourselves, feel our feet on the floor, maybe take a breath. Close your eyes if you like. Most Holy One, God beyond, with, and within, sacred source of all goodness. Tonight we celebrate our diversity and yet our oneness. We thank you for bringing us together as one family with a shared vision and calling, that of fostering wise stewardship of this wonderful, wonderful world we get to be part of. We give you thanks for gathering us together at this time when in our surrounding world leaves are growing yellow, brown, and red and falling to rest on the earth, then restart their journey. And we gather likewise to rest, reflect, be renewed, and restart together. We pause to take stock of where we are, celebrate small victories, and be inspired to pursue greater good, that which is healthy, life-giving, and of you. And we trust that those things will come in due season. Bless this evening and fill us with an ever greater awareness of the bonds that bring us together and the sacred work you've called us to, and give us joy and strength along the way. We pray all this by the names in which we know you. Bless and keep us this night. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Jeremiah. So as we gather tonight, we also hold intentions for healing for our earth, and also for those who are suffering from the fires, those who are refugees in so many places and from so many places around the world due to climate change and ecological degradation. We are all one family. So I'd like to invite our panelists or our conversational sharers to come forth. And I'm just really excited about the sharing we're going to have tonight. So we have Michelle Otero, who is our poet laureate, who is going to be moderating our conversation. Thank you, Michelle. And I'm just calling everybody up here in no specific order. So then we have Estefany, who is with Juntos, and an organizer and a wonderful young woman that I've been pleased to work with Juntos on several of their campaigns. We have Reverend Talitha Arnold, who came from Santa Fe, and she is the pastor of Santa Fe, the United Church of Christ Church in Santa Fe. And then we have Laura Paskus, who is a journalist. And you have bios for all of them in the program, so we're not going to spend time doing that. They are just going to jump right in. So thank you all so much.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. We're very excited to be here with you this evening. And as Sister Joan mentioned, our bios are in the program. We don't want to read those to you because we figure you can take these home with you. And so instead, I've asked our panelists to introduce themselves in one of my favorite ways, and that is through poetry. So inspired by the work of George L. Lyon and Levi Romero, each of our panelists has written a short I Am From poem. And so they're going to introduce themselves one by one, saying their name, where they live, the work you do, and then sharing your poem. And we'll start with Estefany.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Estefany Gonzalez-Mendoza. I am the program coordinator with Juntos, Our Air, Our Water, with Conservation Voters New Mexico Education Fund. And we do environmental justice work in the South Valley and Westgate side of town with Latino immigrant communities. And we do this work to hopefully address some of the environmental racism issues that our communities face, and all of the intersections in the issues that they experience in their realities in their day-to-day life. Okay, so just wanting to make a note that my poem is bilingual, as I am, so yeah. Okay. I am from Huertas de Manzana and cornfields. Yo soy de Alma Leticia y Gerardito. I am from Con todo el corazón to No seas malcriada y Te voy a pegar, Estefany. I am from pan de levadura and homemade tortillas that make your taste buds go wild. Soy de Vicks Vaporú y Mertiolate para las heridas. Bebidas de hierbabuena y caldo de pollo. I am from 3 older sisters and so many cousins. Soy de González con Z y Mendoza. I am from ollas de peltre y estufa de leña durante todas las estaciones del año. I am from humildad y honor. Soy de Papá Lalo y de Mamá Chabela. I am from La Ranchera de Cuauhtémoc y Chabelo. Soy de jugar a la roña y al bote volado. Soy de lotería y buenas. Yo soy Estefany.
Welcome, Estefany. Thank you.
I am Talitha Arnold. In my professional life, I am the senior minister at the United Church of Santa Fe, which is part of the United Church of Christ. Although we draw people from all different kinds of faith traditions in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And it is a church that was started by the United Church of Christ in 1980. I became the pastor in 1987. And from the very beginning, the congregation has had a commitment to social justice, has a commitment to being very grounded in the Christian faith in a lively and engaging way, and also grounded in a commitment to live in harmony with all creation. And a number of years ago, we developed our motto, which is love God, love neighbor, love creation. And we try to do that for better or for worse most of the time. So thank you. It's good to be here tonight. I am not bilingual, except in Latin. So
That counts.
that counts. Well, amo amasamat. So I am from South Phoenix, Arizona, Tempe, Arizona, Claremont, California, Middletown, Connecticut, New Haven, Connecticut, and Santa Fe, New Mexico. I am the daughter of a former U.S. fish and wildlife biologist and a desert botanist mother. I'm also the daughter of a man who worked here in Albuquerque trying to save golden and bald eagles in the 1940s, and then after coming out of 10 years after coming out of World War II, died by suicide in California. Which is why I have my name Talitha, because I am also the daughter of a mother who had 3 other children and moved back to Arizona to live with her mother in 1953 in South Phoenix. And I am the granddaughter of a woman named Talitha, who wanted me to be named that, even though her daughter, my mother, wanted to name me Jane. And so the 2 women named me Talitha Jane. I am the daughter of 2 women who could not agree on my first name. And therefore, I am very well prepared for parish ministry. Most of all tonight, I am delighted to be here with these incredible other women and to see new generations of women stepping forward and doing incredible things, both for the environment and also for this world in general. And I stand in awe of all 3 of you, and I also certainly stand in awe of Sister Joan Brown for all that she has done with the New Mexico Interfaith Power and Light. And I am simply happy to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to Talitha.
Hi, everyone. My name's Laura Paskus. I'm a reporter. And I was super nervous and worried about writing Where I Am From poem tonight because I spend my whole career writing about where other people are from. And I don't talk very much about where I am from. So I wrote maybe my very first poem and certainly the first poem I have ever read out loud to anyone.
You might as well get it all out of the way. There's
So, I am from birch trees and chickadees, from blue jays and maples. I am from stone walls and second growth forests. I am from ticks and mosquitoes, June bugs and lightning bugs. I am from a cop and a children's librarian. I'm from the old country, black bread, expectations, and seeds. I'm from guns and books, from generational silences and very loud conversations. I am from Sunday hikes and nighttime walks. I'm from a 66 Mustang and Ford pickup trucks. I am from dirt track races and the demolition derby. I am from lakes and forests and a gray Atlantic Ocean. I am from tiger lilies, lilacs, roses, cucumbers, and tomatoes. I am from gray squirrels and Catholic hymns, community suppers, and the fireman's breakfast. I am from late spring, humid summer, brilliant fall, and long winter. I am from granite and mica.
Thank you. So I issued this invitation, not challenge maybe, to write a poem, I think on Tuesday morning, and I think you'll agree with me that everyone came through beautifully. So let's give them another round of applause. I know, Laura sent a great email. Are we reading these out loud? I was like, yeah. So thank you all for being willing to do that and for sharing. So I think as Sister Jones said, we really see this more as a conversation. And so I want to invite you all, if you have follow-up questions of each other, feel free to ask those. We'll hold about really 10 to 15 minutes at the end of our time for your comments and questions. So I'm sure you'll have a lot to say after you hear what all of these wonderful women have to say. And so as I'm thinking about Twilight, A Time to Pause, and how often I'm hearing the term this time in our politics, this time in our history, this time in our country, this time of the year with the changing of the weather, there's a lot to reflect on. And I'm excited that I get to do it with all of you tonight. But as I'm thinking of this time, however you interpret that phrase, it's clear to me that there's a need for a different response, a different way that we're being called on to show up. And I'm reminded of the words of Demetria Martinez, who's a wonderful writer, who lives around the corner from here, actually. And when she was coaching me through a bout of writer's block, she said, you know, you never attack that problem at the level of the problem. So if you're not finding words, go around the words. Go for a walk, bake bread, make a collage, paint, dance, do something else, and then you'll outsmart that block. And I think some of what we're being called on to do is that very thing. Maybe not with writer's block, but we're being asked to show up in a different way, to outsmart, to deflect, to go around something. And so I guess this is a two-part question for each of you, but in what ways are you being called on to show up, and how are you outsmarting and disarming and deflecting? And Laura, since you've got a mic in your hand, I'm going to start with you.
So I have always found, like since I was a little kid, I have always found my solace in nature and in being alone in nature. I'm fine sometimes with somebody to hike with, but I really am comfortable and enjoy being alone. And, you know, whether it's the forest I grew up in or the desert here. And because I write about the environment and water scarcity, and especially our changing climate, I've really been struggling, particularly over the last couple of years, to find that solace. Because I warned Michelle I would cry tonight, and I totally will, so sorry. I see changing forests. I see watersheds I've come to really love over the last 20 years changing. And I feel like I put up this big wall recently and didn't go to some of my favorite places. And so would you all take a big, deep breath with me? Okay, thank you. You're so good. And so I was like, I can't, I don't want to be in these spaces. And so kind of stopped doing that and started falling apart a little bit because I wasn't in those places and being active and happy. And so I started walking around my neighborhood instead. And I put my headphones on, even if I wasn't listening to something, so that I wouldn't have to talk to anybody.
I wonder if somebody else does that.
Yeah, because I'm the type of person, I don't get lonely. I like being around all of you, but I'm really comfortable being alone too. So I started walking around my neighborhood because I thought, well, this won't hurt the way it hurts to go some places right now. And this was the perfect time of year to be doing that because we have these cranes. We have these beautiful cranes catching their feathers, catching the sunlight, and making these sounds that thousands of generations of humans have listened to and found comfort and joy. And so I have this particular loop that I like to do, and the cranes have been hanging out in this one particular area, and I would see more and more people every day hanging out in the spot I like to hang out in to watch them take off to go to the river, and I would hurry up and put my headphones back in so I wouldn't have to talk to anyone, but that we could all sort of stand separately and watch the cranes taking off for the evening. And slowly seeing these same people every day and their faces so happy watching the cranes, it forced me into a different space where I'm ready to start seeing my community differently. So that was a long story that made me cry in front of a bunch of people. But that's what I'm trying to do differently is connect with people, take the headphones out, say hello to those same people who I see every day who seem to have that same need at the end of their day to be outside and to be watching the sunset and to be listening to these sounds. And it's made me feel very hopeful in a way that I really hadn't been feeling, particularly in the last 2 years.
Thank you.
So the thing that comes to mind when I think about this is to disarm with our radical love. I feel like we are in a time where there's so much negativity, there's so much at stake, there's always something happening and something after another, an attack after another on our communities, on Mother Nature, that at this, the one thing that comes to mind is con todo el corazón, radical love. To ensure that as we disarm and as we get ahead of how we move forward from this time, we need to also ensure that we don't only lead and we don't only stand in our principle of each one teach one, but what comes to mind is also taking care of one another, taking care of community, taking that time to be okay, to just be okay with not being okay. Oftentimes we put up a front and the work has to get done, so we continue doing the work. But if we don't take care of ourselves, if we don't make sure that we invest that time in us, how are we going to be able to get in front of whatever issue and be able to disarm the constant attacks on our community, on us, on Mother Nature? I think that it's time to make sure that we spread that radical love in a way that we can educate, in the way that we can liberate others, because our liberation and collective liberation depends on each one. And we can't have it if one person and if Mother Nature is not able to heal and we're not able to heal, none of us will.
Thank you both for your sharing. Thank you for talking about grief. I think that's an important place to start in any conversation about the environment, any conversation about Mother Earth. And thank you for reminding us of the deep need for that deep love. That yes, sometimes we do have to shoulder on to get the job done, whatever the job is, but also to go back to those deep sources. When I read your question and also what Demetria Martinez had recommended to you about not trying to hit it head on, but to disarm it, what came to mind for me is something that I think I had begun to forget. I grew up in the Sonora Desert area of central Arizona, and as I mentioned, my mom was a desert botanist who was also a very, very faithful Christian. And then I did a 10-year sojourn back in Connecticut to live among trees and green. And also as somebody who growing up in the Yankee congregational tradition, even in the middle of the Sonoran Desert, wanted to figure out where the oyster dressing came from that we used at Thanksgiving next to the green chili. And then I was called in 1987 to come back to the Southwest to become the pastor for a very small, very struggling church at the time. And at the time, my denomination, like many other sort of progressive or mainline Protestant denominations, was very much into mega church growth. We were supposed to be 500 members in 5 years. Well, we were 90 members, and I wasn't sure the church was going to last. And what I began to realize, two things. One was that I needed to have what I call a desert faith. And I especially need to have it now, a desert faith in what I call a desert time. And that for me, growing up in the Sonoran Desert, which is different than the high desert of northern New Mexico, but what lessons does the desert have to teach me and have to teach us? As a person in the Christian faith, so oftentimes, at least the Christian part of the Gospels, or the Christian part of Scripture, only sees desert as a place of trial and temptation. It's the place where you don't want to go. It's the place where Jesus wrestles with his demons. If you go back to the Hebrew understanding of desert, it is a place where people live and grow and have their being. It's a place of transformation. It's a place of dreams. It's much more akin to native traditions and understandings of desert than the overlay of Paul, and even Jesus was a village boy, not a desert boy. And so for me, then holding the book of creation, of saying what does the desert have to teach us, and so I began to sort of differentiate between what I would call tumbleweed theology, because tumbleweeds grow very fast, but they also blow away in the first dry season. And again, coming from the Sonora Desert, saguaro theology. Saguaros, those giants of the desert, they only grow this tall when they're 50 years old. They put as many roots out as they do above ground. They know how to expand when the times are good. They contract when the times are hard. And all kinds of ways of looking at the desert around me for what lessons of faith did it have to teach me. And actually sort of embarked more on doing a lot of writing around a desert faith for a desert time. But then, about 10 years ago, came up against the grief. Because especially in the Phoenix area of the Sonoran Desert, well, all of the Sonoran Desert, if it's not at the border, which has become a battleground, then the whole Phoenix area, it's no longer a desert. I don't know what it is, but it's not a desert. At least not the desert that I remember. And dealing with the grief of the loss of those wonderful places, the smell of the creosote bushes after the rain. The desert smells like rain, to quote Gary, not Snyder, Nabin, yeah, Gary Nabin. And I used to have to go over to Arizona on a pretty regular basis because my mom was still living there and I was going to meetings and such. And I would fly back into Albuquerque and I would cry all the way driving up La Bajada Hill, from Albuquerque all the way to Santa Fe for exactly the reasons you're talking about. Because because I could see Albuquerque and Santa Fe becoming exactly what Phoenix area had become, which is exactly what Southern California had become. So I think that sometimes to be in touch with that radical love, one has to just sort of stop and say, it breaks my heart. It just, I mean, if you're going to love something or someone, it's going to break your heart. Because they're going to die or change or whatever, and just to be able to sit there with a lament. And that's part of, for me, desert faith as well, as much as I don't want to acknowledge it. It's just sitting with the fact that I can't always change it. So on that happy note, moving right along. Jeez. Oh, man.
The only thing that I'll add, to hopefully end on, just kidding. Something that you mentioned actually made me think of this, that I'm thinking of disarming, outsmarting, but I feel like maybe it's just my ego or something. I'm like, I feel like we already have outsmarted, but what we haven't done is out-organized. So I think I want to think of out-organizing. I think we need to find that unity, true, instead of allyship, to be accomplices, to be shoulder to shoulder unity, that unity. And I feel like that is what we need. We need to out-organize them. And it's the organizer in me that's thinking that.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so here's I have a follow-up for you, and then I have a follow-up for all three of you. And so the follow-up for you in that same vein is, so when because it sounds like love is at the root of all of your organizing, and when you talk about like radical love and taking care of your community, like what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? Like how does that manifest itself in your work and in your life?
Yeah, so those who know me know that my style of organizing is definitely very much rooted with community not being plugged in, because they shouldn't just be plugged in. Community needs to be at the core and center and in the front lines. To me, what that radical love looks like is allowing for community to be able to be and own and hold that space in the center that leads your work. Because at the end of the day, those communities are the ones that are living the realities that they are impacted with every day. And I can come in, and I work a lot with mothers and youth, and I can come into a meeting, and if a mother promotora is telling me about an issue that they're facing, whether it is the water from the faucet is having like a yellow color, to them having issues around immigration, to not being able to make ends meet in the month. That's what it looks like, being able to hear them out, being able to try to listen and figure out ways together that we can find a solution. But not for me to find the solution, because I'm not the one that lives there. I'm not the one that experiences that. I think along with that radical love is allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. In a time where vulnerability is hard, when we're being attacked from multiple ends, and it's hard to not put up those walls, to not feel like vulnerability will make us weak. And I think that once we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, especially in community, we are not only able to build more trust, to build more community, but also ensure that more leaders and that leadership, that communities, and I'm thinking of the moms, and I'm thinking of Marta and Doña Maria right now, like just when we are able to be vulnerable with them, I'm in awe because their leadership that comes into play is huge. And it's just when we give community the space to own their work and protect Mother Earth, because we're all Mother Earth protectors, it's just, the impact is immense.
Here's the follow-up for all of you. But you can answer that one too. So Talitha, you talked about this saguaro love and how, and it sounds like that's a lot like radical love. And with that radical saguaro love also comes like radical acceptance. This thing you love, or this is like loving that you will have your heart broken again and again and again. And with each breaking comes expansion, right? And a deeper ability to love. And so, you spoke about how when times are tough, the saguaro really like roots very deep and it kind of contracts. And I'm wondering what each of you was rooting into at that time. And it's a three-part question. I ask compound questions. So what you're rooting into, actually two, but and what's the expansion you're preparing for? Because when I see us like this, we can't hold that posture forever, and so there has to be a time when we're going to kind of open it up. So what are you rooting into, and what's the expansion you're preparing for? Only two parts, okay.
Sure, thank you. Great question. What am I rooting into? For me, I guess a good example is what we're doing at the church that I serve this year, and that is a whole sermon series and worship series on holding the Bible, the book of the Bible in one hand, and the book of creation in the other, and that tradition goes all the way back to the Hebrew prophets. It goes all the way back to Jesus. It goes all the way back to Martin Luther. St. Augustine. All kinds of people. Have Toni Morrison and others, hold those two books together. And so for me, what I'm trying to get rooted in is the understanding that, once again, that we will never save what we do not love. And so even though that it's going to break your heart to love those woodlands, or to love that desert, or to love that person, or to love that community, you still got to do it, and to be willing to be vulnerable. There's a wonderful quote from Anne Morrow Lindbergh, who was the wife of Charles Lindbergh, wonderful writer, who after the death of her first child, Hour of Gold, Hour of Lead, wrote that to be fully alive, one has to be able to, that suffering alone does not teach, because if that were true, then the whole world would be wise, because the whole world suffers. But that to suffering must be added love, compassion, strength, and a willingness to remain vulnerable. And I remember I came across that quote when I was in high school, and obviously it has stuck with me, because I do think that willingness to continue to be open to the world and open to loving others. I go back to saguaros. My mom did research on saguaros, so I knew a lot about them. But for those of you who might not know, they are really considered trees, but they're not trees that have a central trunk. They're trees that have ribs, woody ribs all the way around, so that indeed, when there's more water, the flesh of the saguaro can expand and get as much water as possible. And when it's dry times, then it does contract. But another aspect of saguaros is that if they're injured, like a woodpecker comes along and pecks into it, chasing a bug or whatever, it will, the saguaro itself will grow around that in what's called a saguaro shoe. It's inside the saguaro itself. It's just sort of woody kind of material. And that can become then a nest for all kinds of critters. So that whole notion that where we're wounded is also the place where we can provide shelter and protection and comfort for others. And I think that for me that is another lesson of the desert, is that sometimes it's the very place that we're wounded that we then know what it feels like, and therefore can provide love and care and comfort and protection for others. I mean, you were talking about that in terms of your own roots back in Mexico, with regard to realizing that you came from a farming community, and now your passion is for water and the earth and all of that. Anyway, so is that an answer to your question? Okay. Okay.
There's no wrong way to do it.
No. No, but seriously, it's a great image of the saguaros. So.
Yeah. So for me, as a journalist, I feel like my secret is that every single story I write is an articulation of love for New Mexico and for our communities and our rivers. And so, the Martinez administration has been a challenging administration. I really think they have been criminally negligent on water and climate change in particular, not to mention, issues like SNAP and behavioral health care and everything else. And so it's really easy, and I've seen my colleagues, I've seen other activists, I've seen many of us, you get so angry and you can become even hate-filled or just angry all the time, and you just burn out. But if you're, for me, doing the kind of reporting that I've had to do over the years, which has been very aggressive. I'm not an aggressive person, as you can probably tell. Like, it is hard for me to sit, to chase a public official through a parking lot, trying to get him to talk to me, or to sit across from somebody who I know dislikes me very strongly and doesn't want to talk to me. But I always think, like, no, this is my Gila River. I need to understand what's happening so I can help other people who love New Mexico, understand what's happening. So for me, journalism is very much an articulation of love, and every single story I write, no matter how nerdy or complicated it is, I hope that readers can, kind of see that it really is, for me, a love of place and the people and landscapes here has been able to sustain me through 16 years of the Bush administration, the Martinez administration, the Trump administration. So, yeah.
That's a tough question for me to answer. I think for me, I feel like I root myself in family. I root myself in family. Like I mentioned earlier, I come from Mexico. My family and I migrated here when I was 9 years old, and I feel like, in a way, I disconnected a lot from where I grew up and those things. When we arrived here, we lived in the South Valley, and my parents still live there. And when I started organizing, and we were having this conversation earlier, I started organizing around immigrant rights work and the immigrant rights movement because of my status, being undocumented. And when I graduated college, after going from being undocumented to being a DACA recipient to being a newly adjusted my status because of my husband, but being the only one in my family, I was just experiencing such identity conflicts that I didn't know where I fit. And I ended up taking a job with Juntos as a contractor in environmental justice work. And at the beginning, in all honesty, I saw it as just another job because I was so burnt out and I was experiencing so many things, from trying and always being on the defense and being hit left and right with different things. Little did I know that I would not only meet amazing organizers, but they would root me back and take me back to my childhood and remind me of what my Papa Lalo used to say, like, take care of Mother Earth because it feeds us, it takes care of us, it gives so much for us. And it gets me emotional because it's the mother promotoras that brought me back to that. And it showed me the perfect connection an intersection of our identities and the issues we face. And it wasn't just the environmental justice. It wasn't just about the issues that we were facing in the environment, but it was beyond that. Environmental racism, the discrimination that our communities face because they're poor, they're communities of color, they're undocumented, they're refugees. There's so many things that this program, interestingly enough, was able to put together and bring. It was just what I needed. And I often say that the moms that I get to work with now, and I'm honored and privileged to work with them now, rooted me back. And that was 2 years ago. So I feel like I'm in a very different place from where I was then. And it rooted me back to family because it reminded me of the organizing work my dad did back home with farmers. It rooted me in my mom always caring for community and trying to help out everyone and being an organizer without really being an organizer or knowing that she was being an organizer. So I root myself in family. I root myself in love. I don't know how to I guess, to express that, like, in the way that I root myself in love. It's not just love for those that are around me, but love for what it could be. And I guess desire for us to live in a world where we're not just worried about what the person next to us is thinking about us or what their opinion might be on us, or if they think I don't belong. So I think it's also about just wanting to make sure that the world we live in, the future, or the world where my nephews and nieces will live, or even maybe my kids, that is a better one than where we're at now. So.
Thank you all. I think we won't be the only ones with tears in our eyes this evening, so thank you all, really. So I'm thinking about just kind of the madness and chaos, and I'm a bit of a news junkie, so I really, it's on in the car, I have it on in the morning after I meditate, because I want to be informed, because I am the consumer of the 24-hour news cycles. But I realized how anxious I was getting right before the election, and that it wasn't serving me, that it was really making me ill in some ways. And I cleverly, unbeknownst to me actually, I just bought a ticket and then realized after I had purchased the ticket, I'm gonna be in Mexico during the time of our elections. I early voted, so I took in my civic duty, but it was so good to remove myself from all the noise. And so as I've kind of re-entered, I'm thinking about, it's almost like I've gotten a chance just to wipe the slate clean, and I'm thinking about, what do I really want to put back on that slate? And so as you're thinking about kind of what's required of you right now at this time, what are some of the things you're letting go of that are no longer serving you?
So when after the 2016 election, I, like probably most people in this room, kind of flipped out. And, suddenly there were a million things that I needed to be writing about and needed to be doing, and people I needed to be calling to make sure that they were okay. And I had to step back and say, I made this list for myself. And kind of forced myself to really evaluate what power do I have? What influence do I have? What are my strengths? And what can I do that will make a difference? And what can I do that nobody else can do? And so for me, the thing that I can do is I can write about environment issues in New Mexico. And occasionally something would happen that I would feel like New Mexico media wasn't covering, like when the family separations really first started, when we started realizing the scope of the family separations. I wrote a little bit about that because I felt like nobody else in New Mexico was doing that yet. And I had the power and the influence to be able to call up our senators and our congressional delegation as a member of the press and say, what are you doing about this? And, you know, force them to answer that question. So for me, I basically have a checklist to kind of keep myself from spiraling out of control, basically, and not being able to do anything. As, you know, a very specific checklist of what are the things that I can do that nobody else can do or is doing, and where can I have the most positive influence. And that's been a very helpful checklist for me.
Is it an actual checklist? Yeah, where do you keep it?
So it used to be for probably 6 months after the 2016 election, it was on the refrigerator. And then I felt like maybe she probably doesn't need to see that every day. Sorry, honey.
Don't have any
Yeah. That's right. And so now it kind of migrates. Every new notebook I start kind of has some of those reminders.
What do I try to give up? Like you, I could be a news junkie because I always want to be informed. I'm incredibly curious about all kinds of things. But one of the things I've done in the last year or so is that anytime I hear a certain voice come on the radio, I turn it off. I literally turn it off. I just decided, no, there are other voices. And going back to what you were saying about family, my family is pretty small in terms of the brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews and that sort of thing. But when I think of family, I think of the great communion of saints, the cloud of witnesses that surrounds me, the people that have believed in me and loved me and prayed for me when I didn't feel like I had a prayer, and also who showed me how do you live in really hard times. And people who overcame a lot. One of the things I sometimes do is when I hit certain birthdays, like 50 or 60 or beyond, I think about what was going on in my mother's life and in my grandmother's life when they were that age, and that really helps me put my life back in perspective. So I sort of think about the great cloud of witnesses that's around me and people who have overcome all kinds of things. I was very close friends. One of my mentors in ministry was African-American man by the name of Reuben Shears, who actually grew up in the Charleston Emmanuel AME Church. And he was became one of the leaders of the United Church of Christ. And when I think about what it must have been like for him as a young man coming of age in Charleston, South Carolina in the 1940s and 50s, puts my life in perspective. Various other people that are just part of that, and also the people that I serve in the congregations that I've served, of realizing what they've overcome, and that I'd rather hear their voices, and I'd rather be reminded of their strength and their courage than some of the foolishness that's going on around. The other thing I think that in the last couple of years in particular that I've really had to give up, the United Church of Christ is a real social justice, activist kind of congregation. Every different religion or tradition has its own sort of strengths, and it's also its own Achilles heels. And I can get into a thing of thinking, I'm not doing enough, or the church isn't doing enough, and we need to be involved in this cause or that cause or whatever. And for me, I have to make sure that what we do on Sunday morning when people come together for worship is the absolute center of that community. That the singing that we do, the prayers that we offer, the love that we try to share is very, very deeply rooted. And then everything else comes out of that. And so giving up the need to make sure that we're involved in every single cause, because we can't be, and that the most important thing we have to do is to really get people grounded in in love and in celebration and in community. And we do it, the central thing for us is worship. And coming together, breaking out of that silence, even though we have one service where they're all introverts and they sit all over the place. They have at least 10 chairs between each of them. But even then, they're in community. And, but that has to be the absolute center, and that it's the voice of, to use the language, it's the voice of God, it's the voice of singing, it's the voice of hope, it's the voice of faith. That's what I need to make sure is at the very center of my life, instead of all the other voices that are out there.
I think first of all, the news they drive me nuts. But what I'm letting go of is doubt and questioning. But bad questioning that makes me doubt myself and doubt that we can win, because I know that we can. So letting go of that little voice in my head that's always like, hey, are you sure this is the right move? Are you strategizing properly? Are you planning properly? What if this happens? So I think letting go of that voice, but also making sure that I am critical and making sure that whatever work we do is really going to be a positive impact on our communities. I'm letting go of, I think, I'm trying to find the word, but letting go of wanting to adapt to a model that might not work in organizing, and instead making sure that we modify it. So I want to make sure that we allow for new community, allow for new people to come into their leadership and really own their leadership, and give away, just let go of that control, even if it's in organizing, campaign work, or anything. Just make sure that we truly allow for those communities to step into their own power. So letting go of the things that don't work anymore and welcoming the things that might work. And as far as what keeps me just grounded, what keeps me going, it's the sacrifice that my parents did, letting go of everything for me. And that guy over there in the gray sweater keeps me grounded. He's the one that has to hear it all, he's my husband. And everyone tells me, oh, is your husband also an organizer? Not yet, he's getting there. And it's a strategy too, because I need him to just hear me out without any bias. And also ground me whenever I need to be told, maybe you're overthinking it. So letting go of that doubt and overthinking this.
Could I add one more thing? I think that at least for women of my generation needs to be let go of, is feeling like we shouldn't have a voice, or we shouldn't. To be up here among the three of you, to have seen what happened in terms of the House of Representatives election this last 3 weeks, to see what happened in New Mexico. That is just incredibly powerful. To see women claiming their authority. Yes, we listen to others, but also not all. But there's a difference, I think, between listening and deferring. And that my generation and older generations of women were taught to defer. And to see younger generations, maybe it's because of Title IX in sports, I don't know, but to be able to claim your authority, and that you have a right, ain't you got a right to the tree of life, to quote Garden Parks, and that, I think, giving up that sense that no, we don't have a voice is, it's great to be up on this podium with all three of you.
I'll just add one more thing. I think something that comes to mind that we all need to let go of is that internalization of just like self-doubt, internalizing stereotypes, internalizing all of the microaggressions and macroaggressions that we've suffered. I think oftentimes we set ourselves up in a way that we are the ones doubting ourselves because of a comment that someone made years ago, and because of the environment we were in years ago. But
really looking within and making sure that we let go of those to make sure that we are also not projecting those internalized comments or even internalized racism onto the work we do. So that's definitely something I'm letting go.
I think I loved what you said, is this on? About letting go of doubt, and to kind of add on to in agreement with what you both were saying is, I think having to be confronted in the media with watching whether it was Trump looming over Hillary Clinton during the debates, or the Kavanaugh hearings, or the Weinstein stuff, I think as hard as that was to witness all of that, it was also like, I feel like for me and so many women I know, that to see it so blatantly, you were like, oh, it hasn't just been me this whole time. It wasn't just, I don't need to doubt myself anymore. I don't need to even take a second to do that anymore. And I think that's been it's been a very interesting time to be living through, and to see like generationally, like my daughter and her friends, they're so much more powerful even than the women of my generation, and just it's so exciting to see it building every single day.
And that has environmental consequences. I mean, if we live in a time when it's okay for women's bodies and souls and spirits and intellect to be degraded, decimated, whatever, then it's not that far of a jump to do that to Mother Earth. And so to help people make those connections between how we treat one another and how we treat those who we've seen as being less than, whether because of color or because of gender or whatever, then it's not that, then that's also how we will treat this earth. And I think that this is an opportunity in this time to help people make those connections.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think that's a perfect segue to open it up to all of you. I'm sure there are questions, comments, and so if you'd like to direct your question or comment to one particular person on our half circle, I won't call it a panel, then please feel free to do that, or if you would just like to open it up to anyone who'd like to answer, please make that clear. There's a woman at the back.
I just came back from El Paso and heard that there'll be 300 more folks that came in today. El Paso is a community, and they are receiving hundreds every single day of refugees, and many of them are coming because of Holy Mother Earth and the drought, etc. But I never thought of El Paso as such a giving community. I mean, in 1 week, they processed 2,000 people. And they keep coming, and they keep coming, and they keep coming. And every day, there are volunteers. And every day, chaparral, which is a very poor, a lot of undocumented, etc. Every day they gather and they make 200 sandwiches. So those sandwiches can go on the buses when those people leave. But you know, many times we say direct service, and we forget. Those direct services of all those people has produced such a political mindset. So I just want to confirm everything that you folks have said, and especially the power of love.
Thank you. Marlene's my community member. We were down there on the border together on the weekend. She stayed. She just got back now. And I have to say that there was one gentleman from Honduras Guatemala, who said that they'd suffered 6 years of unprecedented drought in the arid triangle, and they had no food, and he couldn't grow anything. The corn was just dust, and they had no choice but to leave. So it's the consequences of ecological degradation and climate change, even though we don't hear about that aspect. So there's some other questions? Comments? This has been a marvelous, marvelous conversation. Does anybody have? Good. Todd.
Hi there, and greetings from Taos. Came down for this tonight. Thank you for being here. I'd just like to weave a few thoughts of what I heard from you together and I guess propose or suggest something. Talitha, what you said about essentially prayer, spirit being at the center of all that we do, I think this New Mexico Interfaith Power and Light, that's maybe our unique charism, our gift that we might bring to the movement in New Mexico, is that across all of these cultures, as Jeremiah said, we come together celebrating our diversity and unity, but finding our own unique pathways, but having a common umbrella or a common theme. Renewable energy for all of New Mexico, and the watershed way or watershed movement up and down the Rio Grande seem to be two statewide things we can get behind. As an organizer, Estefany, it seems like this notion of finding our unification, our common cause across cultures. I just feel like claiming our hope. From when you're talking about in a time of despair, it's so easy to look at the news chatter and the cycle and feel overwhelmed and overpowered. But to know our own, we can take care of our own place. And like Gandhi talked about Swaraj or home rule, that we can learn enoughness in our own watershed, organize around our own watershed and our own renewable energy so that we can think of our counties or our watershed regions as our intentional communities of hope and justice. And I guess I'm wondering if you all have something to say about knitting our larger statewide network together through local place-based regional activism that way.
I think, yeah, definitely. I think that we're in a time where everything and everyone is on their toes and just trying to put out fires. And we're all trying to make sure that we're also at the same time protecting our community, protecting Mother Nature, protecting our health, protecting our children. And I think that for me, it's just mind-boggling is that oftentimes in those, whenever we're experiencing that, there's still not the unity that we need. So that's why I'm like, yes, we need that unity. We need to make sure that we unify, we come together, we fight for all of us and everything around us. Because if we don't, then there's still someone that's not living a life full of dignity and a brilliant life, the brilliant life that they deserve. But with that, I think also the aspect that to unity, like what I would like to add to that is also making sure that as we unify, as we come together, as we're trying to build movements and continue to make impacts in our world, we make sure that we do it in a way that's respectful, that's mindful, that's inclusive, that embodies what it looks like for community to not just be called to action whenever there's the added benefit to it, but for community to always be there, for community not to be a plug-in, for community to be at the core and center because they are the ones most impacted. But yes, there's definitely that huge need and that desire for that unity that's not allyship, because we can all be allies. I can say I'm your ally, and a lot of people said they were my allies and my family's allies, but then Trump is in office. So I don't want allies. I want to make sure that we have people who I can really rely on. They're my accomplice. They're willing to throw down, as we say, and they're willing to stand up whenever there's injustice, and not just whenever it's behind the door, but out in public. It's time for us to be vocal. It's time for us to be held accountable. It's time for us to hold that unity, but hold it not only indoors, hold it out also behind these walls. And make sure that when we do that, we're also allowing and opening doors when we're using our privilege to make sure that those who cannot take up that space are brought to that space. But yeah, unity. We need unity.
Other questions or comments? We have time for a few more.
I want to thank all of you for your participation. I was looking over the audience this evening and I noticed that there are probably 2 women for every man here, which I think is great in many ways. And especially want to thank you all for your holistic approach to the whole matter of earth care and people care, and the focus on the mutual respect. If we could work together with our common humanity and so many things in common that we have, rather than focusing on a few insignificant differences, I think the world will take notice. And we can get much more done.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Thank you, ladies, for being here tonight. I'm glad to see many of you, these faces here tonight for this event. I just kind of wanted to share what Laura went through. I kind of went through the same thing about a month, 5 weeks ago, losing faith in what was happening around us, the diminishing of our cultures, our way of life, our environment, are constantly being attacked, by our administration. And I was beginning to lose, in a sense, faith. I found myself like you wandering, what can I find, where can I go? And then for some reason one night I got a good night's sleep, had a dream, had a dream about actually being at some sort of a conference where I was in the mountains with young students, where I was there presenting at some whatever event we were doing. And we had talked about the environment, working together as communities and moving forward, addressing climate change, etc. And that kind of reaffirmed and brought back my faith again and got me back out into the fight. I got more involved with the campaigns because I was working with Michelle Grisham, campaign, Senator Heinrichs, and then, of course, Deb Haaland's campaigns. So I really got involved. I was back out canvassing, et cetera, et cetera. So that kind of relit my goal and my desire to make change. And so I'm glad to hear that all of you have that desire to help and rethink what we need to do as a community, as people, as a country, as who we all are. I'm a member of the United Nations through my NGO, Southwest Native Cultures, and I've done a lot of work at the UN, and hearing horror stories that we heard from, from Africa and down South America, Brazil, the indigenous peoples being, genocide that they're facing now, and then have it almost coming here now. The United States has really been a wake up for everybody, and I thought, and my feeling is that it's awakened everybody to realize that we've really got to take hold of our democracy and keep it in place. When you guys had mentioned, when Joan had mentioned, what's that one word, or that one word that we should say to somebody? Well, I mentioned to Tom, democracy. To me, that one word was democracy, and we saw that big change, what we saw last week, the blue wave, the green wave that is happening now. And I'm so happy that I live here in New Mexico, and the potential that we have, and Michelle has said it also, that we can take the lead and take the rest of the country and lead to where we can go with it. Renewable energy, solar energy, etc. So I'm happy to hear that a lot of us are here on this kind of in the same plane. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Terry.
I think you mentioned a really good point, which Michelle and I talked about a little bit, is sleep. It's so good.
That was the thing I celebrated. That was the thing I was grateful for. I slept really well last night.
Makes a difference.
It does. It makes a huge difference. Speaking of light, powered light.
Well, I just want to thank you all so much. Let's give them a hand. Thank you. It's just you're sharing your vulnerability, your poeticness, your rootedness, your love of community, of place, of Mother Earth, and each of you such beautiful, strong women. So thank you so much for your sharing with us this night in conversation. And we'd like to give you just a little something, and there's a little story that goes with it, just to thank you. So you're all going to get a little card with something in it. But you see all this bread here. So at the beginning of this year, every year I usually take a little retreat time, and I think, well, now what is kind of inspiring me to be kind of a focal point? You mentioned your list. Well, it's not a list, it's something else, and it's different every year. So last December, I thought, I'm going to start a sourdough starter, speaking of the cloud of witnesses, and I come from Kansas, so we have wheat, and my mother always baked bread. I baked bread. My grandmother had sourdough starter. I killed one once. I was trying to bring it out west, and it got too hot, and it died. So I thought, I'm going to try this again. So it takes 9 days to capture wild yeast that is just in the air that we can't see, but it's there. And to me, it's like grace, and it is love, which infuses grace. And after 9 days, I had this wonderful sourdough starter. So to me, it reminds me of the potential that we each individually have, we have collectively in community, we have in our earth, in the world, and this inspiration stays in my refrigerator. But it's a discipline because it has to be used about every week as well, and fed and nurtured. But there's this wonderful nourishment that comes from it. So I wanted to gift each of you. You can choose whichever loaf you want. Some is sourdough, some is not sourdough. There's also some scones there. You only get to take one with you because some other people are going to get some too. But just because what you shared from your heart needs to continue to be nourished, and you are with others in family, community that you can share with as well. So let's give them a hand again. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad you said we get to keep the bread because I've just been looking at it. I'm like, is that just an offering? Is it the altar? And so I'm glad it's a sharing altar. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So while they're getting their bread, and I'm moving just the computer over here, if a couple people could help me move the computer, I just want to share just shortly a few things that Interfaith Power and Light has done this year, and also the stories of our Seed and Sprout awardees. But while we're doing that, I want to invite you to just take a few seconds to think, what was one thing that was spoken tonight or shared from the heart that really touched you, and then share it with a person next to you. And by the time you do that, we'll be ready for our next part, okay?